the topic today is going to be Introduction to the Holocaust. And when they asked me to do this last year, or a few months ago when Jerry asked me, I was a little hesitant because you can't teach of the Holocaust in an hour. It's impossible. And even in my class that I teach on the Holocaust during winter session, it's 12 hours. It's 6 sessions, 2 hours apiece. And I still barely get through what I think you should get through. So what I decided to do is to give a little bit of a story, my mother's story. I'll talk a little bit about my dad, but my mother's story, and then begin with the introduction to my first class, which is anti-Semitism and why the Jews. But it's basically going to be like when you get from Amazon, you want to look at a book and they'll give you the first chapter, or they'll just give you an appetizer. So you're getting the appetizer today. You're getting nothing else but the appetizer because it's just impossible. And this story is going to be the story of my mother and father, but mostly my mother. Her name is Riva. Mandelbaum was her maiden name. Kibort is the last name. And she, as Jerry said, my mom is still alive. She's going to be 92 years old. She had me when she was 19 years old. And when I got married at 21, she said I was too young. And I said, well, you got married at 17. She says, I was mature. All right? It's just classic. But 91, she's almost 92. She'll be 92 in March. And this is going to be her story with a little bit about my dad, too. Why me? First of all, I am not an academic. As Jerry said, I was a pediatric gastroenterologist. I was in medicine for 40 years. And I loved medicine. I loved taking care of kids and being at Children's Hospital of Minnesota. Most of you, whatever city you're in, you probably have a major children's hospital. And that was my career. Had I not got into medical school, I would have been a history teacher, because that's my second love. And I'll talk a little bit quickly about presidents in a second. But why am I giving this talk? So I am a child of survivors. Both my parents lived, one from Lithuania, my mother is from Poland, and my dad died 12 years ago. My mom, as I said, is still alive. My entire life, the Holocaust has been a filter, and I'm careful with that word, a filter to how I look at the world. It isn't the only filter. I'm not distorted and things like that, but whoever I am today, that filter is always there. Whether I turned out to be a pediatrician, because my mother said you got to help people, whether I taught, whatever I do, whether my politics tend to be liberal, but the fact is, who I am always has that little filter. I have many friends and survivors' kids whose filter is a little different. And some people who lived through the Holocaust, overgeneralization on my part, 2 types of paths they could take. One part would say, why did this happen to me? And they are depressed, and they are sad their entire life after the Holocaust. The other path someone could take, which my parents did, is I survived for a reason. There must be a purpose why I survived. And they convey that to their children. And I have a lot of first cousins, and especially the male first cousins, who had tough childhoods because their fathers and their parents came out of it depressed. So this is just a filter for me. My dad, Ben, grew up in Šavel, Lithuania, and he ended up in Dachau for his last year and a half of life. He was 19 years old when the Americans liberated him. He weighed 100 pounds, 19 years old. He was lucky, though, because he survived with his brother and his father. They survived. And I'll talk a second a little bit more. My mother grew up in Warsaw. She was in the Warsaw Ghetto till 1942, and then I'll explain what happens to her. I have a very strong Jewish upbringing, probably like a lot of you. I went to Hebrew school till I was in 12th grade, afternoon. None of you did that. Oh, wait, I got a few cousins here who did it, or for a cousin. 12th grade, I had to go to Hebrew school, all right? I was involved in conservative Judaism. My parents kept kosher. I was in USY, LTF. I was a labor Zionist, and I'm proud to say that I was a labor Zionist. If I explain that to my kids, they have no idea what a labor Zionist is. The fact is, think about kibbutz and socialism. My parents made me a socialist when I was a young kid. And so I went to camps. I went to Hebrew University as a junior. I was the president of my synagogue. I just finished 2 years as being president of Minnesota Hillel, University of Minnesota Hillel. So I have a strong upbringing in Judaism, and a proud one. This, though, as I said, was not my main study. My main study was medicine. My avocation, as Jerry said, was U.S. presidential history. I was a history major in college. And again, had I not got to medical school, I probably would have been a history teacher. But I was a European history teacher, a student. European history, 1974. Why? Think about it. 1976, we hadn't even had our bicentennial yet in 1974. I thought, how much history is there, American history? It's not even 200 years. Let's do European history. It's more interesting. I do love to teach. I taught medical students, residents, doctors, not only on gastroenterology, but on safety and quality in medicine. I love teaching my presidential course, and now the one on the Holocaust. And I love to learn. And I don't mind getting up in front of crowds. It energizes me. But why are we having this talk today? Elie Wiesel once said, without memory, there would be no civilization, no society, no future. By the way, if any of you want the slides, I see you if you're taking pictures. If you want my slides afterwards, I have my email. Email me. I'll send you the slides so you don't have to take notes. All right, here is a picture of my parents 15 years ago. My dad died 12 years ago. Riva and Ben Kibort. All right, my mother, Riva, was born in 1933, so one of the youngest remaining survivors. There's less than 200,000 survivors now internationally, and she was one of the youngest. There are still younger ones. She was born in Warsaw, and I'll explain her history. And my dad was born in 1926 in a place called Šavel, Lithuania. Quick about my dad. So he lives in an upper middle class family. My grandfather, Kalman, made leather goods. He would make briefcases, purses, luggage, and for the people in the city. And they did very well. They had a nice home. I've seen a picture of the home, nice home. The Germans enter Lithuania. They take them out of their home, he, his brother, his father, and his mother, and they put them in a combined sort of barracks, but they let my grandfather work. He had to make the leather goods for the Nazis. But that helped them survive till 1944. So he was fortunate. Then in 44, they get sent to Dachau. His brother, his dad, and they are separated from my grandmother, his mother. My grandmother, my Bobby, my grandmother said to them, you have to remember this address. And this address is in a place called Buffalo Min. Buffalo Min. Not Buffalo, New York, Minnesota. A tiny little town in Minnesota. In the 40s was a very little town. Buffalo, Minnesota. My dad had no idea. After the war is over, after the Americans liberate my dad and his family, he writes to a cousin in Buffalo, Min. The cousin says, yes, I will sponsor you. Come to America. And by the way, your mother's still alive. So they didn't know. The Bobby was still alive. She wrote too. And so they get together in Europe, and then they come to America. Very fortunate. All four survive. But this story is going to be about Riva, all right, and her background.
Excuse me. Is it possible to use the mic? They can't.
You're having trouble hearing?
Yes, trouble hearing. Is it possible to speak clear?
Julio, can you get me a hand mic? Okay. No, I apologize. If I sit here, can you hear me? All right, I won't move around as much. So we're going to tell Riva's story from Warsaw, Poland to Minneapolis, Minnesota. All right. 1933, Warsaw, Poland, 1.3 million people, 350,000 Jews, 27% Jewish population. It's basically New York City, 1/10 the size, or 1/6 the size back then, but a very big city with a lot of Jewish people. If you look at this picture in 1933, you see cars, you see horses and buggies still. It's 1933. Streetcars. This was still during the Depression. And I think, can you hear me now? Okay, I'll just in case, I'll use. During the Depression, but I wanted you to get a look. This is not my grandfather's store, but he had a store in front like that, and he made shoes, and I'll explain. Warsaw, 1939, beautiful city, just like when you go now to Italy or most of Europe, when you see these older cities, the buildings have about 4 stories because that's all people could walk up. They didn't have elevators, but a beautiful city. You look, it's colorized here. Again, still horses and buggies in the streets in 1939. For all of you, by the way, when I teach this class, I gear it towards high school seniors and freshmen in college. All right, so I'm going to assume most of you have knowledge, much more knowledge, probably a lot of you more than I do about the topic. So, but I'm doing this as if I'm teaching high school seniors and freshmen in college. So you have to remind them, say, this is a map. This is a map. It's not a Google map. It's not a GPS. It is a map. It doesn't tell you to make a U-turn today like your GPS does. But I want to remind the group of where our history is in Europe in 1939. So you see, of course, Great Britain. You see, of course, Great Britain. We've got France, Spain. Here is Germany. Germany right in the middle. Poland right next to it. Soviet Union in 1939. Belarus, White Russia, and Ukraine. Ukraine is part of the Soviet Union, part of the issues we've hearing about today. You've got the Scandinavian countries north, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. So my father is in Lithuania, mother in Poland. You see Germany. You see those crossed lines. Let's see if I can do this. Right in here is Alsace-Lorraine. That was a demilitarized zone between Germany and France after World War I. Czechoslovakia back then, right in the middle. For any of you who are doctors in the room, it always reminds me of pancreas. I see that little Czechoslovakia looks like the pancreas going in there, all right? But Romania, you've got to do it. I'm not going to be talking. One of my talks happens to be, why didn't America do something? Why? Okay, that's like the 5th lecture. I just want to remind you, look at the position of Poland. And many of us will ask the question, why didn't the Americans, why didn't the British bomb the camps, the railroads? Why didn't they do it? Part of the reason is, look at the distance between Great Britain and Poland. Flights could have gone from Great Britain to Poland, but they couldn't get back. They couldn't get back. And we were still, the Allies were in North Africa, not even in Italy. So even if they had wanted to say, let's go bomb the railroad tracks to the camps, they would not be able to get back. That isn't an excuse for Russia. Russia could have. Russia had no interest in saving the Jews. All right, so that's a map. Map number 2. Again, think about this. I'm giving it to high school kids. Here's Poland and the towns I want you to look at and feel comfortable about. Warsaw. So that's where my mother was born, in Warsaw. It's the equivalent of Chicago, middle of the country. The towns I want you to focus in on when I talk will be Lublin. That's like going from Warsaw to St. Louis. Częstochowa, right there. That's where my mom was in one of her labor camps. And there'll be a town called Dęblin, which is south of Lublin. That's sort of like where New Orleans would be. So look at a map of Poland back then. Soviet Union is right to the right. You see the town of Minsk, that's Ukraine. East Prussia is north of Poland. And after World War I, Danzig became a port city for Poland because they had no connection to the ocean. But Germany is on both sides of it. just a reminder, I just made the comment about why the Allies didn't go into the concentration camps and because of the distance. But there was a reason the Germans decided to put all the major death camps. There are 6 or 7 major death camps. That's the only purpose was to kill Jews. But there were thousands of other concentration camps. Thousands of small little concentration camps and labor camps. So there was a reason that they put them in Poland, the major death camps. And part of the reason was the Polish people, not all, but the Polish people had no interest in saving the Jewish people of their country at that time. This is a picture of my grandfather. So this is my mother's father. It is the only picture she has of her father, the only one. All her surviving, any of the siblings, this is the only one we have. All right. His name, this is good for those non-Jews in the room, it'll teach you how to go. His name is Chaim Leibish Mandelbaum. And I asked my mother, I said, why was his name Leibish? Chaim means life in Hebrew, right? Anybody have a theory as to why Leibish? Anybody know Yiddish here? Why Leibish? What does Leibish mean? Or to live? To live, right? Chaim means life. And it dawned on me, they called him Leibish because it was the Yiddish way for saying Chaim. So Leibish. So he is a shoemaker, and my mother is adamant that I say he made new shoes. He didn't fix old shoes, he made new shoes. All right. But because his nickname was Leibish, I have 3 first cousins, the firstborn in each of my cousins' families, Larry, Lyle, Lenny, they're all after my grandfather. My mother's mother was named Peru. She doesn't have a picture. I'm going to get verklempt. She doesn't have one picture of her mother. She can't remember what her mother looks like. I'm amazed my mother can function. How you can go through life and say to yourself, I can't remember what my mother looked like. Think about it. Think all of us right now. How many thousands of pictures do you have on this, right? I've got 6,000 pictures. I probably have 30 of my granddaughter in the same pose over and over and over. All right? Not one picture. Not one picture. None of the relatives or distant cousins in Israel or in South America. We don't have a picture. So I have no idea what she looked like. Her name was Peru. Thus, I have cousins, Pearl, Penny, Patty, Pam, all named after her. An extremely poor family, but according to my mom, very poor. I'm very happy, excuse me. They lived in a 1-bedroom apartment, and the shoe where he was doing his work was in the front of the 1-bedroom apartment. I said to my mom, how did 9 people live in 1 bedroom? I said, where did you sleep? She says, I can't remember. She says, all I remember is we had a big bed, and everybody was head to foot. That's all she remembered. And she says, I have no idea where my parents slept. I said, well, they must have slept somewhere. They had 7 kids. They were doing something. All right? 7 children, all girls except 1 boy, and the parents. So 9 people in this 1-room apartment. So she's born March 4th, 1933. Her sister, Auntie Hanka, or Hannah, Ann, Masha, Mindel, Edda, Moisha, or Mark, Riva, and Golda. The asterisk, Masha was sent to Treblinka, and Golda died before the war started. She probably had a kidney, I'm trying to figure out as a physician, she probably had kidney disease and died of kidney failure. So today, we're going a little out of order, but today, my mother is on the right here, but let's start. This is Anne, the oldest. She's 10 years older. So during the war, when my mom was 6, so the oldest sister is 16 years old, and it's relevant. You'll see. The next one, so Masha didn't survive. Masha goes to Treblinka. Masha, the second sister, had a congenital limp. She had a short foot. And that's why she ended up in Treblinka, and I'll explain in a second. The third child, Mindel, then, this does this on its own. Then Edda, Mark, and then my mom. All right, so that was the last time they were together quite a while ago. The only one left right now is my mom. All right. September 1st, 1939. What happens? Germany does a blitzkrieg into Poland. This is after our friend Neville Chamberlain. He should rot in hell. Neville Chamberlain had appeased the Germans and said, oh yeah, you can have part of the Sudetenland. Well, it'll be okay. We'll avoid war. And we give him that. And then he takes more, and he takes more. And finally, September 1st, 1939, he invades Poland. All right? Hopefully we learn lessons. We're going through things today. When you give in to dictators, not good things happen. September 1st, 1939, it looks like Ukraine today. All right? The buildings gets bombed out. So, as I said, my mother's born on September 1st. She is now 6 years old. 6 years old, hasn't been to school yet, only speaks Yiddish, well, her sisters have all gone to public school and speak Polish fluently. She's 6 years old. 14 days later, 14 days on the Erev of the Jewish New Year, it was Rosh Hashanah, Germans are bombing Warsaw. He goes out looking for the kids because he's afraid they're going to get killed. He gets killed, all right? Her father gets killed. He is buried in a mass grave in the giant Jewish cemetery in Warsaw. Have any of you been to Warsaw? Have you been to that cemetery? So yeah, I went 6 years ago. I took the family to a trip to Israel, but beforehand I took my 3 sons to Warsaw, to Auschwitz, to Birkenau, and to Krakow, and to say the prayer over the dead for my grandfather. So here's this family. Now they have 6 children remaining. The father is now dead. The mother, who doesn't have an occupation, all the income came from him, they are now in Warsaw. But to remind you, the Warsaw Ghetto wasn't completed or built till November 1940. A year and a half later. So they're still living in Warsaw, but they don't have money, they don't have availability of foodstuffs go down. The kids have to sneak around to steal things and to bring things home. And so it wasn't until November of 1940 that they get placed in the Warsaw Ghetto. The actual ghetto was completed. Let me remind you some facts about the Warsaw Ghetto. It was the largest ghetto in Europe after the war, once the war started. It was established in 1940, like I said, November. It was under the control of the Germans. The German general government controlled it. That's important because when we do studies, when we talk about how does it compare if the Germans were in control or if they let the country, let's say the Hungarians run what was going on, how does that impact it? Greatly. If the Germans controlled that country, Jews were killed very rapidly. So this is Warsaw. 460,000 people in an area of 1.3 square miles. 500,000 people, and I kept thinking, how do I define what's 1.3 square miles? So in this community, if any of you are in a country club like Mission Hills like I am, Mission Hills is 2.65 square miles. A golf course is about 2.6 square miles. This is 1/2 the size, and there are 500,000 people all in that area. That averages out to be 9 people per room. 9 people. And my mother had 9 people because she lived with her aunt and a cousin once they got put into the ghetto. What was their life like? They were on a diet of 400 to 800 calories per day. All of us, shouldn't hit my stuff. All of us with that mid-gut here are on 15 to 2,000 calories a day. And even then you get hungry. When you're on 400 to 800 calories, all you can think about is eating. It doesn't go away. All right? Out of that 500,000 people in the Warsaw Ghetto, 250,000 of them are sent to Treblinka, to the death camp at Treblinka, including her mother, including her sister. By May of 43, my mother is already out. I'll explain in a second. She's out of the ghetto already. The Warsaw Uprising, and the ghetto is completely destroyed by the Germans after the uprising. 300,000 people die by either bullets or gas, all right, at the camps. One of the interesting things I learned in doing my preparations for the different talks is we have a tendency to think about the Holocaust as everybody died in concentration camp, in the death camps. 2 million people, 2 million Jews, and of course there were many others who died. The Romas, we used to use the word gypsies, but Romas, Jehovah's Witnesses, gay, many other people were killed. But out of the Jews, 2 million people died by bullets. We tend to think of just the gas chambers, but they were bullets. Back of the head, line you up, whole row, kill you all, into the pits, we'll cover you up. 2 million people by bullets. All right. 92,000 people starved to death. When I asked my mom, what's it like? What was it like? She said, it was like zombies were walking on the streets. When I give you the lecture, when we give a lecture about why didn't the Jews resist? It's a whole talk. Just why didn't we resist? Why didn't others resist? People, merchants, no guns. They didn't possess any guns. I don't even know if it would have made any difference. You've got this military there that if anybody stands up to try to resist, they get shot, and then they shoot 10 other people just to make it sure that you understand if you resist, you're going to die. Or you get lined up. So these are images my mother has of what, as a child, of what was going on. So how does her story begin? As I said, she was in the ghetto. She was in the ghetto from 1940 to 1942. Two of her sisters, not the oldest, but the next two, both, as I said, went to public school in Poland, so they spoke Polish fluently. They were blonde. They put on crosses. They got out of the ghetto, and they worked at a pig farm for a year and a half, two of her sisters. They were able to sneak in money, to sneak in food to their family to help them survive. But by 1942, they were already hearing, because everybody on the farm thought they were Catholic girls, they were hearing, one of the friends said to them, "Did you hear? The Germans are coming back into the ghetto and they're going to kill all the Jews. Take them all to Treblinka." The two sisters say, "We've got to get out of here. We've got to get out of this farm." They come back to the ghetto to where their mother and the other sister and brother are. And the first reaction the grandmother says is, she looks at her two daughters. They're well nourished. They've been eating well. She says, "You're fat." The rest of us, but they say, "Mom, we got to get out. We've got to get out of the ghetto today." The mother says, "You go." So Anne, Mindel, Etta, and Mark, and Riva, the five of them, you go out today. The grandmother, and Masha, the one with the congenital defect of the leg, will go tomorrow. One day. They get out. The last time my mother sees her mother and sister is, July 22nd, 1942. She sees them. They're outside the ghetto. They look like Polish kids. They're all blonde. My aunts, the older sisters, tell my mother, "You say nothing," because she can only speak Yiddish. You're a mute. You say, all right, you're a mute, and it's basically 1940. She's 7 years old. You do not say anything. They could at least fake looking like non-Jews. They see their mother and their sister get put in trucks, and sent to Treblinka. That was the last time she saw. But the mother had said to them, "You go to this Polish farmer who used to do business with your father, and he'll take care of you." They go to him. They give him money. They give him silver. He takes them in that night. He gets drunk. He starts screaming at them, "You dirty Jews." Get out of here, because if I don't get you out of here, they're going to kill me. So he kicks them out. He kicks them out, and they then have to run through cornfields and head their way. They still have money. They have to get their way to Demblin. Demblin is where all their cousins are, or at least they think they are. So I showed you that picture. Warsaw, let's just go down towards St. Louis, from Chicago down to St. Louis, so Warsaw to Demblin. They go to Demblin, none of their family exists. They've all been wiped out. Except for one uncle they find. This Yonah is their one uncle. He tells them everybody's been taken off, and the only Jews that are remaining are put into the center of the city, rounded up, and sent to a labor camp in Demblin, Poland. She is there from 1942 to 1944. She's sent by boxcars down to Demblin. She is hidden. I said, Mom, how could they hide you for a year and a half? She said the Germans knew, and the Polish people knew that there were kids in the camp being hidden. And I said, well, how did you get food? She said, no, they knew we existed, because every day I would get in line for a piece of black old bread, stale, and a cup of black water, which was coffee. And she said this was her diet, and she said they knew we existed, but they needed the labor. They needed the older sisters to do the labor, and these kids were taken care of by either some of them had mothers, my mother didn't, and some had older sisters, all right? She is hidden in barracks. And again, I'll show you, here's Warsaw down to Demblin. Today, it would take you 3.5 hours. By train, it took about 8 hours back then. All right, this is my mom. This was her being interviewed about 6 years ago at PBS. She's very proud. She said, I've been to I'm on PBS. All right, so I hope this works.
I was born in Warsaw, Poland in 1933. I remember when the Germans came in, and actually the soldiers, they weren't so bad. We lined up in lines to get food. They gave us soup and bread, and that was my first memory of the German soldiers. They were not that bad, but we learned later on what it was going to be like. The Warsaw Ghetto towards the end looked like people walking around like zombies, dead bodies, people who had starved from hunger. It was the most devastating place to live in. They took away everybody's dignity, you know? I was very, very hungry, and I told my mother that I was hungry, and she said to me, Rivala, I have nothing to give you. There's nothing to eat. What you should do is take this big rubber ball and go out and play, and you'll forget that you're hungry. We were put on trains and taken to a camp called Demblin. There were 11 children in the camp. I was the oldest among the 11. And then there was this German who said to me, schmeiß das Kind weg, throw the child away, because I was holding the 6-month-old little baby. I ran into the dirty clothing that the women had taken off, a pile of dirty clothes. And I could see that the same German took a machine gun and killed all 11 children right in front of me while I was watching them. I ran into the women's barrack, and the women sort of attacked me, saying, where are all the kids? What happened to the children? And I said, I don't know. I believe they probably knew. I didn't have to tell them. I was one of the youngest in my camp. I survived when I was 12. And I feel if I'm not going to speak out now, it'll be up to my children and my grandchildren and maybe great-grandchildren to tell the story of the Holocaust. So we have to speak up. Whatever you see injustices at all, you have to speak up. It bothers me a great deal when I see somebody who's hungry. It bothers me if I see a homeless person. It bothers me when I see people standing in line for food, because all these things come back to me all the time.
Are you angry?
Am I angry? I'm angry. I tell you what I'm angry. I'm angry mostly because I was an orphan. They deprived me of my mother and father. They deprived me of grandparents, of cousins. They deprived me of a childhood that I never had. Yes, I'm angry. But at the same time, I'm also very happy that I'm here in America and for the opportunities that I had and what America had given to me. I'm very happy about that. My name is Riva Kibort, and this is my brief but spectacular take on being a survivor.
So some days I'm just amazed my mother can function at all. At all. I did not know that story about her seeing the 10 other children mowed down in front of her till I heard that PBS. My parents were very open about the Holocaust and about what their lives were like. But as a child, I don't know if any of the other children of survivors here, my parents were open with my friends. I mean, I had friends who would come over and talk to my parents about their stories. I didn't want to, it wasn't that I didn't want to hear it. It was almost like it's incomprehensible that you could think that your parents went through something like this. So the stories were always there, but never to the detail that I should have, till recently, known much better. So I had never heard that story about those kids being shot down right in front of her till about 6 years ago. She has now sent, the Russians are coming. In 1944, they are invading from the east towards the west as the Allies are coming the other way. All right. The Germans in 1944 decide to evacuate the labor camp in Demblin. They put all the men, women from the camps in Demblin, they put them in cattle cars, and they send them to a town called Czestochowa. It's not easy for me to say. It's a slave labor camp where men, women, and children had to be at least like 11, 12 or older. They put them to work in labor camps. My mother was put to make bullets for the Germans. That's all she did all day, is make bullets for them. All right. Her sister Anne, the oldest sister, once was caught stealing food to feed Riva, and she got beaten badly by a female capo, a Polish female capo, and it almost caused her to die. They are in the camp till 1945, and in my family, January 17th, 1945, so we're coming on our 80th anniversary. So in my family, we celebrate January 17th. And for many, many years, every 5 years especially, the whole family that exists today gets together back in Minneapolis. It's a great time to be in Minneapolis, January 17th. All my cousins in Florida say, couldn't we do it in Florida? Can't we just? It's about every year we have all the family. And now it's up to 150, 160 people. But all the siblings are dead. My mom's the last one. She feels guilty about it. I try to remind her, you're the youngest child. You were meant to be the last one. But of course, that doesn't make it easier for her. All right, so January 17th is, this year we're going to have our 80th anniversary. This is what the camp looked like. Czestochowa, the labor camp. These were the barracks she was in. So I said January 17th. I just wanted to show you, if you look at Demblin, Demblin is over here, and Czestochowa is over here. In between is Krakow. All right? Why is Krakow significant when it comes to camps? What's close to Krakow? Auschwitz. I said to my mom, do you realize how lucky you were in a sense? You ever say that to a survivor? How lucky you were. Auschwitz was on the way between those two cities. They could have easily taken her to Auschwitz, but they still needed labor. The Germans still needed labor. They get liberated by the Russians. So my father is very beholden to the American GIs. My mom's family to Russians. The Russians liberated my mother. They come to the camp in Czestochowa. They're free. You're free. You're starving. You're free. You have no shoes. She said she wore rags on her feet. They walk 150 miles over 3 weeks to get to Demblin. They always want to go back to Demblin, hoping that any of the family members they have came back if they were alive. All right. During that walk, they faced hostile Polish people. They slept in barns. The older sisters took care of everybody else. No clothes, no shoes. She said, my mom said, I had rags on my feet. My sisters used to take the black watery, supposedly coffee, boil it, and they'd wash my feet in that, trying to get the sores off and things like that. They lived in bombed out houses with other women. They finally get to Demblin. They meet a distant cousin, a guy named Fred Stern, who had been a partisan, part of the resistance, when I do that talk. They get there, there's nobody there. So he says to them, go to Lublin, so go up towards Warsaw halfway, go to Lublin, go to the armory there, because in the armory there'll be a list of names. Maybe somebody in the family survived. They go to Lublin by train. Now it doesn't cost. It's after the war. The trains take them. There are a lot of refugees on the walls, but no family. Nobody's left. Her mother, her aunts, her uncles, her grandparents, all wiped out. All right. He tells the older sisters and say, there's an orphanage, a Catholic orphanage, that will take care of Riva, because Riva right now is still 12 years old, and she gets put in an orphanage, a Catholic orphanage, until September of 45. Again, I don't know how she functions. Her sisters just leave her off at an orphanage. You know, they had no, they sort of said, they'll feed you, they take care of you. Her sisters and her brother go elsewhere for a while, all right? What does she think as a 12-year-old? What has she gone through already? And you say, how does she do it? My aunts, two older aunts, now get married in Lublin. My Aunt Anne marries a man, Uncle Sam, a Shia, marries him. He's already lost a wife and children in the war. He remarries. And my Aunt Mindel marries a Jewish man from Germany, my Uncle David, but they stay in Lublin. All right? The older sibs, then Edda and Mark, sort of the in-between kids, they leave Riva behind, and they go to Germany, to Landsberg, where they're hoping to go to America eventually. They meet a woman in Landsberg, Germany, and say, they hear that she has a daughter at that orphanage back in Poland. Would you get my sister and take her back? I'm thinking, how can they do this? They don't know a person. They're going to say, you go and pick up our sister and bring her back to Germany. And the woman does. She picks up her own daughter and my mother and brings them back to West Germany. She goes through Polish, Czechoslovakia borders to Germany, no ID, no passport. She's 12 years old. She doesn't have passports. She traveled at night. When she gets to Landsberg, they put her in, once again, they put her in a sanatorium, an orphanage, run by nuns in Germany for a month. All right? She then is sent to and put in a DP camp. Do we have anybody here born in DP camps? One person. And close, Brussels, you weren't in a DP camp, but you were born in Europe after the war, right? Yeah. I thought you told me, where were you born? Yes. Yeah. No, not in DP camp, but you were born after the war, but before coming here. Yeah. So my mom is sent to, and some of her siblings sent to a camp called Feldafing. It does exist. I Googled it. Feldafing in Germany from 1946 to 47. She's in a DP camp. She's 13 to 14 years old at the time. Those camps are then run, this is before Israel was a state, so they were run by people from Palestine who said, we want these kids to come to Israel, all right? Zionists from pre-Israel run the school. She learns Hebrew, she learns songs, dancing. She's thriving. She has sort of a kibbutz-like feeling. This is what these are pictures of Feldafing, the DP camp back then. My mother put on a lot of weight after the war. She hates this picture. She says, don't ever show this picture. She's probably a 13-year, I can say it, I'm a pediatrician. She's prepubescent. She's going, you put on a little weight before girls start menstruating and going through. She hates this picture. The family loves this picture. So what happens? So she's now in this DP camp. What's going to happen to her? Poland doesn't want the Jews back. Germany doesn't want them. Nobody wants them. Palestine, pre-Israel, wants them. But the British say no. And America says, we'll only take 5,000 of you a year. 5,000. That's all we'll take. All right. Her sisters live in Poland still. They've gotten married. Now they're coming over to Germany. The Americans now control the west part of Germany. They give Jewish families bungalows that used to belong to Germans. They said, you can live in these houses. So they lived in a home, in a bungalow in Munich. My mom said she slept in the kitchen. She was the youngest. That's where they put her. They went to West Germany because that's where the Americans were, and that was a potential opportunity for them. This is her sister with some of my cousins back then. In Feldafing, in the DP camp. I didn't know this story until a few years ago. Feldafing's DP camp, General Eisenhower, President Eisenhower, eventually comes to visit the camp. My mother tells me, as a 13-year-old girl, she got to hand Eisenhower flowers to welcome him. You can go to YouTube and write in Feldafing, General Eisenhower, and there's a video. I was so hoping that they would show the video of the flowers. There's no video there. But what was amazing is two things. One, my father was in the same camp, but he's 6 years older. He doesn't know her. They don't know that till they get to America, that they were in the same camp. What I found very interesting is 2 years ago, my mother was honored at the Holocaust Center in Naples, Florida. One of my cousins had paid for a wing, and she's being honored. And she's sitting down at the dinner next to Eisenhower's grandson. So she tells him the story. She says, I met your grandfather. I met your grandfather, and I'm meeting you. So you can find videos of Eisenhower's visit, but it's hard. But I can't find hers. And what's sad is every time my mother looks at old videos, whether the Warsaw Ghetto, she's always looking for her mother, always trying to think. Or even in the camps, I tried to find my father. Could I find a picture of him? But it's hard to do. Here's my mother. She's gotten rid of that baby fat. She's about 14 years old here. Learned to ride a bike by her brother, who stole that bike. This was her school. I don't have a picture of her, but this was her school, and this is what I have a sense of what the kids look like in the school. Why would this picture? This is the picture of the boat she was on coming to America. All right. So she's still in the DP camp. An American soldier comes to the school, an African American soldier. She had never met an African American or a person of color before being in the DP camp. She sees this soldier coming into the classroom saying, who among you are orphans? And if you're orphans, would you like to live in America? She runs home. She says, I've got the opportunity. She's 14 years old. She's already saying, I've got the opportunity to go to America. Her older sister says, Anne says, you can go as long as your other sister, Etta, the 16-year-old at the time, will also go. And so they were both orphans, and they were both allowed to go to America. Her brother, my Uncle Mark, goes to Israel, joins the Navy. I just wanted to put the craziness. He joins the Navy. He's born in Warsaw. There's a river. How does he know anything about the Navy? So he goes to Palestine. Her other sisters are married with children. You saw a picture. They stay in Europe for a couple more years. So my mother and her 14-year-old, 16-year-old, we're going across the Atlantic. We're going on this cruise ship here, Carnival Cruise. Look at this ship. They were in the bottom of the ship. She said she was seasick for 9 days. She had left the 2nd DP camp, and then she says, all she remembers on the trip other than being seasick is a song that I don't know the song, but it must have been a popular song in 1947 or something. Give me 5 minutes more. She said they played that song all the time. She lands in New York City on May 7th, 1947. Highest brings them over. Great organization. Today it's still a great organization. Highest brings them over. They give her a tour of New York City. She gets a jelly donut. For you Midwesterners, that's a Bismarck, right? For any of you, we used to call them Bismarcks, a jelly donut, an orange. She's had oranges before, she said, and a Hershey bar. Now, a Hershey bar, she said, it was so hot, and it was only May, she put it under her pillow in the place she was staying. It melted in the morning. And she said, in the morning, they gave me Rice Krispies. She thought, it is the god-awfulest food I've ever tasted in my life. And this is a woman who had soup with cabbage and maggots in it, and she thought Rice Krispies was the grossest thing she'd ever had. All right. They send her and her sister on a train to Chicago. Any of you from Chicago by any chance? Does this building look familiar at all? Okay, I'll tell you in a second. So this is in the 40s. She's on a train to Chicago. They speak no English. They can't read the menus. They give them menus. They can't read it. For the 2.5 days, water. That's all they have is water. But she remembers she saw African-American porters for the first time. She stays in her berth. They put down the shoes by the bed. Those shoes are polished in the morning. She's amazed. She comes to Chicago and is put in the Nathan Marks house. This is a house for orphans in Chicago. She is there from May to July 1947. She's sent to a foster home in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Random event. There's no connection to Minneapolis. My father had a connection to Buffalo Min, so he was in Minneapolis because of family. It was random that a family was willing to take her in. She slept again in the kitchen in that house. And because her sister was already 16, her sister couldn't had to act as an adult. Had to live on her own, get a job, and things like that. But at least the two of them were in the same city together. My Aunt Etta goes to night school. She meets my father, who goes to night school. She's already married. She says, hey, I've got a girl for you. I'm a little bothered by this. My mother, in 1947, is 14, 15 years old. My father's 21 or 22. Today, he'd be in jail, right? Anyhow, so my mother gets put in public school. They start her in kindergarten. She's 14 years old. She advances every 3 months a grade. In 3 years, she's gone from kindergarten to 11th grade. All right? The first day she's in school, she sits down. The teacher knows that she only speaks Yiddish. So the teacher asks, these are 5-year-olds, kindergarten. She says to the class, does anybody speak Yiddish here? All right? And a little girl raises her hands. And the teacher says, well, could you say something to Riva? And the little girl says, geh schlaf. To translate means go to sleep. That's all that little girl knew. But she thought she could speak Yiddish. All right? So my mother progresses over years, going truly every 3 months, another grade up. By the time she is a junior in high school, she gets vocational training. There was a vocational high school in Minneapolis. She learns to type. She learns to transcribe. What I feel bad about is my mother is smart, and she never had an opportunity to go to college. They said this is what you're going to do, and this is what she did. She then meets my father in 1948 when she's 15, and 2 years later when she is 17, she gets married. She had to get permission from her social worker to do it. And to this day, she's pissed that that social worker said, yes, go ahead, get married. I mean, my parents were married over 60 years, great marriage. But she just says, why did that woman let me get married at 17? All right. So they meet and they get married. Pictures, my mom and dad. This is three of the sisters, my Aunt Ed on the front, the oldest sister Ann, and my mom when she was 18 years old. I'm born in 52, my sister 54, my brother in 61. So in summary, and before I move on to the last little section, I'll watch my time here too. What can I tell you about the family? Rags to riches. Classic American story. My father comes to America. He had been educated because the war started when he was 14 years old. He could read, he could write, he can do math. He was a smart guy, and he comes to America, has to work. Retrospectively, I think he could have been a good an attorney or a CPA. He goes, he becomes a box boy in a company, a women's wholesale clothing company, manufacturer. For those of you who speak Yiddish, schmata business, all right? 40 years later, he owns the company, all right? Classic. He was fortunate. He had a non-Jewish boss and a Jewish boss, and they saw his potential. They kept promoting him to the point where he eventually owned the company, all right? True rags to riches. My parents, more than 60 years of marriage, many trips internationally. They were very welcomed. That's not true for a lot of immigrants. Their synagogue welcomed them and treated them wonderfully. My dad invested in apartment buildings. They had many parties at the house on Shabbat, on Sabbath, at their house. American holidays in our house were always celebrated. Every July 4th, my father would take an American flag and walk around the house, outside the house. He would walk around the house. They'd have big parties with their friends on July 4th. It was so important to him to be an American citizen. And as you heard my mother say, was she angry? Yes. But was she also happy of being an American? Yes. All right. Passovers were a big deal in my house, still are. My mother, my 91-year-old mother, will make all the food, almost all the food now, for 35, 40 people, all right? True gefilte fish. Handmade, homemade. It's the grossest food, but boy, it's good when you get it, all right? But she makes all the food. Finally, we've convinced her, let it be at one of the niece's house, but you can still make as much food. High holidays were important in our house, and finally, my mother is unbelievable when it comes to numbers. She can remember every birthday, every phone number of all her children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. Kano Horror, she's got like 14, 15 great-grandchildren. She knows their birthdays. She'll tell me things, people died. She'll remember the exact date. She is phenomenal when it comes to that. The hardest thing for my mom now is being the youngest. I said, what'd you do today? She said, I went to a funeral. I said, who died? She says, who didn't die? Who didn't die? She's a voracious reader. Cooking. Now, she's also given me instructions at her funeral and a eulogy. I am not supposed to say anything about her cooking. She says, I can't stand it when you go to women's funerals and all they say is the woman was a good cook. Well, by the way, my mother was a very good cook. My wife might not always agree, but and so I'm going to say, the first thing I say at her eulogy will be, she was a good cook. All right. She's knitting, singing. The greatest gift we've given her since my dad died was an iPad. She didn't want it. She said, I don't want this thing. She loves her iPad. She can't live without it. She says, Google, play some Yiddish songs. And she watches movies and things like that. She's always put family first. You can imagine why. She used to walk the lakes. Minneapolis has many lakes. It's wonderful to walk. They're all about 2 or 3 miles in diameter. She likes sports. My father loved sports. My father was a 5'10", bald Jewish guy. In 2nd grade, he told me he played for the Minneapolis Lakers, the predecessors of the Los Angeles Lakers. I believed him. I went to second grade in show and tell, and I said, my dad plays for the Lakers. And she hates the Packers. My mother hates the Packers with a passion, which most of us Minnesotans and Chicago fans do. All right, this is a good picture of my mom and dad. Great, like most of our parents, great dancers, right? People who grew up in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, they were great dancers. You'd sit there, my wife's family too, you'd sit there at events, weddings, and you'd look, and God, they could dance well. And I always felt bad that we couldn't. This is the latest picture. So this is my mom's immediate family. So here's Riva right in there. All right. These are all her children, her grandchildren, and most of her great-grandchildren. 4 aren't there because they're in college. But this was a wedding. So this is what that one woman's history has come to. And for the January 17th event, we will have over 150, even 160 people. So all my cousins, even though all their parents have died, they will all be there. All right. So I'm going to give you quickly the appetizer of what the class would be like. And I would love for all of you to just look at the LIR. Jerry's not paying me to do this. Look at the LIR site and look at the classes. They're enjoyable. I mean, well, how tough is it? You get up, you can be in your pajamas, just don't eat in front of the Zoom camera. And every once in a while, there's somebody's falling asleep. But they're great classes. And I said, everyone, Dr. Smith here is one of our speakers. He teaches about Harry Truman. People do this because this is their passion. And so you'll get nothing but enthusiasm. There's no homework. There's no tests. You can just enjoy. All right. So this is the little appetizer. This would be my first class, the beginning of the first class. The question is, why the Jews? Why the Jews? And why am I feeling morally and ethically that I have to have this conversation with you? And it's important for me to do because of my family's history. One, because we're going through a time period where there is, if it's for me, I'm home. It's okay. We all go through it. It's serious. One, because we're going through a period of denial. Denial. How do we deny what's right in front of us, where there's photographs? Where Eisenhower was one of the greatest things he did after the war is he made the soldiers take films of it. He said, because someday somebody's going to say this didn't happen. A movie called Denial, where Deborah Lipstadt, who works under the Biden administration now, won this court case against the man in Britain who said the Holocaust didn't happen. Why else? Why else should we be doing it? And for this crowd, it's not, you know it. It happened. But the crowd I should be talking to are 5th graders, 4th graders, And how many of you have had a conversation with your kids about it or your grandkids? I'll ask everyone in this group. How many of you sat down and watched the movie Schindler's List with your grandchildren? All right? I haven't. I need to. I need them to sit and watch Schindler's List. It's 25 years old now, that movie. All right? Why else should we be having this conversation? Because in The Economist, which I consider a good magazine and good with honest news, maybe it's because 20% of Americans under 30, 20% don't believe the Holocaust occurred. All right? So it's your responsibility to sit down with your kids and grandkids or great-grandkids and say, it occurred, and you better learn about it, because it can happen again. When I teach my course, I teach it based upon this book, and I'd highly recommend the book. It's called Why? Explaining the Holocaust by Dr. Peter Hayes. It's in paperback, so it's cheap. All right? Why? And it's great. Dr. Peter Hayes is a Catholic, gay man, professor emeritus at Northwestern, who has been teaching for 30 years on the Holocaust. And when he came, he was in town here 2 years ago. I went up to him and I said, could I use your book as a basis of my class? He said, absolutely. It's public information, and you can use it for anything. He is if you YouTube him on lectures, he's phenomenal. But if you want A good summary of the Holocaust is in this book, and that's what I try to teach through the class. So I base it on 8 chapters. We combine a couple. He said these are the 8 questions students in college ask him. Every class. After 30 years, he said, I've got to hone it down into 8 lectures, because at Northwestern they have a quarter system, not a semester, and they're only allowed 8 classes. So what are the topics? Why the Jews? Why were they the targets? Why the Germans? Why were they the attackers? If you had asked the whole group of people in Europe in the end of the 1800s, where would it be most likely that Jews would be murdered in the future? What would most people say? Russia. Russia, not Germany. All right. Why the Germans? Why murder? Why did it escalate from the Nuremberg laws all the way to the final solution? And why? How did it happen so fast? 80% of the Jews were killed within 18 months. Not that 5 or 6 year period. Over an 18-month period, 80% were killed. Why didn't we fight back? Why didn't the Russian soldiers fight back? Why didn't the French fight back? Homelands. Why did survival rates differ in different countries? What caused? And part of the Germans being in control of the government had a lot to do with it or not. Onlookers. Why such limited help from the US, from Britain, from Canada? Why was there such limits to what went on? And we have a long discussion about the US and about the church, the Catholic Church, what they did and didn't do. Okay? And finally, what are the legacies? What are the lessons we need to learn? So that's what my course is about.
Hi, I'm John.
I'm going to skip that. Sorry about John there. Yeah. If you were in class, that's a 14-minute review of the war, in a sense, but not for today. So what's the essential question as we come to the conclusion? The essential question is, how and why did the Holocaust happen? And Raoul Hilberg, famous Holocaust scholar, says, at crucial junctures, every individual makes a decision, and every decision is individual. What is the definition of the Holocaust? The U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum uses this as its definition, a systematic. So there was a system to it, bureaucratic. There was a government that supported it, state-sponsored persecution and murder of approximately 6 million Jews, and by its collaborators. Holocaust is a word of Greek origin meaning sacrifice by fire. That's what Holocaust means. In Hebrew, we say Shoah, Holocaust by fire, or sacrifice by fire. The Nazis who came to power in Germany in January of 1933 believed that the Germans were racially superior and that the Jews deemed inferior, were an alien threat. All right. During that same period, but not to the same percentages, they also went out after other racially inferior, at least in their opinion, other people, Roma, we used to say gypsies, the disabled. In fact, they started with the disabled first. The T4 experiments, they would kill disabled people, and that's how they learned what to do with Jews. Slavic people they considered inferior, Poles, Russians, and others. And then other groups were persecuted because of their behavioral, because of their politics and ideologies. Communists, socialists, Jehovah's Witnesses, and homosexuals. Who are the Jews? So if I'm going to teach a class to high school kids or first year college students, most of you can say, oh, who are the Jews? Oh, it's a religion. All right? So I would say the following. It is a shared religion practiced in many ways. Most of you are aware in America, we tend to have Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, and within Orthodox there are multiple shoots. There's Modern Orthodox, there's Chabad, there's Lubavitch, there's Black Hats. We have a full spectrum of options. It's a cafeteria plan of what you can choose about what's your religion. But it is multi-ethnic. There is a belief that Jews are a white race. First of all, race, as a doctor, race is a social construct. Race does not exist. Every one of us, if there were people of color in this room, every one of us would share the same DNA, 99.999%, all right? Race has become a social construct. It's something that we, over time, since the 1400s, said, oh, these people are different. We're going to subjugate them to other things. It is multi-ethnic, multi-racial. If you go to Israel today, 50% of people in Israel are people of color. They're not Europeans. Shared history, a family, above all, a people, not just a religion. If I do give you a little timeline as we're trying to explain what it is, there is a thing going around now thinking that Jews are being accused of being colonialists. Jews archaeologically have been in this land for at least 3,000 years. There is archaeological findings that say King David, King Solomon existed, and their buildings exist, and their coins exist. The struggle we have is what happened. Where was Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Rachel, Leah? You know, the whole mishpacha. Where we don't have proof of them. We have it in our stories only till recently. For the first time, there has been the pharaoh that followed Ramses II. In one of their hieroglyphics says the people of Israel have been, the Hebrews have been wiped out. That's the only facts we have. But nevertheless, we have existed in this area in the Middle East since at least 1025 BCE, so 3,000 years ago, we've existed. The first temple was existed, the second temple, and all of this has archaeology to show it. And by 70 CE, this is when we are kicked out by the Romans. They kick us out, and the diaspora begins. But even then, there were still Jews who lived in the northern part of Israel. All right. This is the diaspora. After 70, we disperse all over the world. We disperse to Europe, to North Africa, down to South Africa, all the way to Asia. And after Columbus, we start coming to North and South America. Just so you understand, Jews, if you ask the general population what percentage of America is Jewish, what do you think they would say? Let me ask, huh? What? 10? Yeah, some people think as much as 10% and 30%. Jews in America are 2.4% of the population. In the world, Jews are only 1 in 4 to 500. We are a tiny, tiny minority. Leave us alone. Just leave us alone. All right? Just please leave us alone. All right? 2% of the world population, 15 million Jews. If the 6 million Jews had not been killed in World War II, there might be about 32 to 50 million Jews today. All right? That was a genocide. All right? That was a genocide. On the world itself, all right, there are 5.8 in the United States. There are 20% of the world is Catholic, 1.3 billion with a B. Muslims, 1.9 billion. Hindus, 1.2 billion. And Buddhists, 535 million. We are a tiny, tiny minority. Leave us alone. All right, I'll just finish up by giving some definitions, and maybe in the last video I'll show why the Jews. So Dr. Hayes, Peter Hayes, says, here's his definition of anti-Semitism: a categorical impugning of Jews as collectively embodying distasteful and or destructive traits, the belief that Jews have common repellent and or ruinous qualities that set them apart from non-Jews. He would say, anti-Semitism says, it doesn't matter, Phil, if you say you're not a Jew, or if you're not, or you don't participate in the religion. You can say, I'm not Jewish. They will say, you have no choice. You're a descendant. That's part of who you are. You're a race. This is what the Germans did. This is what anti-Semites do. The International Holocaust Remembrance, and you might see all kinds of debates about should places take on this definition or not. Anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards the Jews, whether rhetorical or physical manifestations. It is directed toward Jews or non-Jewish individuals and their property. this is the final thing I'm going to show you, and this is why, for a class of high school students and freshmen, this is a good thing to do. I would convey to you that anti-Semitism is a virus. Anti-Semitism is a virus that is always in our society, always. It is like chicken pox. Here's the pediatrician in me. All of you, have everybody gotten a shingles vaccine? Yes. Good to hear. Don't let them ever tell you those vaccines aren't good for you. All right? Shingles. Why do you have shingles? Because the chicken pox virus, when you all had chicken pox as little kids before the vaccine, right? You got chicken pox, you got through it, thankfully. And that virus has stayed in your nerve cells all these years. And all of a sudden, it pops out, and you get the terrible shingles. Why does it pop out? Because your immune system has gotten weaker as you've gotten older. So you get the shot, so your immune system kicks in again. That is what anti-Semitism is. Whenever society is in chaos, whenever the economy is bad, anti-Semitism goes up. It is a reflection. It is a virus that's always there. So we're going to finish off with this 3-minute video by a Dr. Jonathan Sachs, who used to be the head rabbi in England. He's passed away. Brilliant man. But I loved how he explains it. That's true. I love it so much it won't go. Julio. Down by the schoolyard. Here we go.
Within living memory of the Holocaust, after which the world said it would never happen again, anti-Semitism has returned. But what is anti-Semitism, and why should its return be cause for grave concern, not only for Jews, but for all of us? Historically, anti-Semitism has been hard to define because it expresses itself in such contradictory ways. Before the Holocaust, Jews were hated because they were poor and because they were rich, because they were communists and because they were capitalists, because they kept to themselves and because they infiltrated everywhere, because they clung to ancient religious beliefs, and because they were rootless cosmopolitans who believed nothing. So what is anti-Semitism? Let's be clear, not liking people because they're different isn't anti-Semitism, it's xenophobia. Criticizing Israel isn't anti-Semitism. It's part of the democratic process, and Israel is a democracy. Anti-Semitism is something much more dangerous. It means persecuting Jews and denying them the right to exist collectively as Jews with the same rights as everyone else. It's a prejudice that, like a virus, has survived over time by mutating. So in the Middle Ages, Jews were persecuted because of their religion. In the 19th and 20th centuries, they were reviled because of their race. Today, Jews are attacked because of the existence of their nation-state, Israel. Denying Israel's right to exist is the new anti-Semitism. And just as anti-Semitism has mutated, so has its legitimation. Each time, as the persecution descended into barbarity, the persecutors reached for the highest form of justification available. In the Middle Ages, it was religion. In post-Enlightenment Europe, it was science, the so-called scientific study of race. Today, it's human rights. Whenever you hear human rights invoked to deny Israel's right to exist, you are hearing the new anti-Semitism. So, why has it returned? There are many reasons, but one root cause is the cognitive failure called scapegoating. When bad things happen to a group, its members can ask one of two questions: what did we do wrong? Or who did this to us? The entire fate of the group will depend on which it chooses. If it asks, what did we do wrong? It has begun the process of healing the harm. But if instead it asks, who did this to us? It's defined itself as a victim. It will then seek a scapegoat to blame for all its problems. Classically, this has been the Jews, because for 1,000 years they were the most conspicuous non-Christian minority in Europe, and today, because Israel is the most conspicuous non-Muslim country in the Middle East. The argument is always the same. We are innocent, therefore they are guilty. Therefore, if we are to be free, they, the Jews or the State of Israel, must be destroyed. That is how the great evils begin. Why then should we all care about this? After all, if we're not Jewish, what has it got to do with us? The answer is that anti-Semitism is about the inability of a group to make space for difference. And because we're all different, the hate that begins with Jews never ends with Jews. It wasn't Jews alone who suffered under Hitler. It wasn't Jews alone who suffered under Stalin. It isn't Jews alone who suffer under the radical Islamists and others who deny Israel's right to exist. Anti-Semitism is the world's most reliable early warning sign of a major threat to freedom, humanity, and the dignity of difference. It matters to all of us, which is why we must fight it together.
So this is where I would, this was the appetizer, and this is the first lecture is all about anti-Semitism and why the Jews. But you can see why I think this is important if I was teaching at high school levels or in college. You have to start somewhere. So I want to thank you all for the opportunity to do this. And I'm happy, any questions, comments? If not, and any of the ones who got, your children of survivors, I'd love to talk to you for a minute or two afterwards, just to get your names and addresses. I'm looking for people to talk to my classes, so to do that. But again, thank you, and I'll have a great holiday season. And oh, you have a question?
No, I just want to compliment you. I just want to say it was fabulous.
Thank you, thank you, thank you very much.